The Young and the Restless spoilers. Next 2 week, March 16 to 27-2026. The fire in the hearth of the Newman Ranch study crackled, casting, dancing, malevolent shadows across the portrait of Victor Newman. The patriarch stood by the heavy oak desk, a crystal tumbler of neat scotch resting in his hand, though the amber liquid remained untouched. The rescue of Jack Abbott from the squalid, windowless room where he had been held captive for weeks should have brought a sense of closure to Genoa City. The local news stations were running non-stop coverage of the Abbott family's tearful reunion, painting a picture of triumph over tragedy. But for Victor, Jack's survival was merely the closing of one irritating chapter and the explosive opening of another. The real catastrophe was the woman who had used the chaos of the kidnapping to ascend to power, sliding into the vacuum with the grace of a venomous snake, Phyllis Summers. While Victor's vast resources had been stretched thin, coordinating international search parties and dealing with the labyrinthine fallout of Jack's disappearance, Phyllis had orchestrated a masterful, bloodless corporate coup. She had outmaneuvered the Newman faction, consolidated voting blocs, and firmly planted herself in the executive chair at Chancellor Industries. Victor took a slow, deliberate sip of his scotch, the burn of the alcohol mirroring the cold fury radiating in his chest. Chancellor Industries was a legacy, a monolithic pillar of the Genoa City business landscape, and seeing it in the hands of a woman he considered an erratic, opportunistic parasite was a profound insult. He was determined to take it back, no matter the cost. The double doors of the study swung open and Phyllis strode in, uninvited but entirely unbothered. She wore a tailored crimson suit that seemed to vibrate with defiance, her signature red hair cascading over her shoulders. She surveyed the room with a triumphant smirk, fully aware of the storm brewing behind Victor's stoic, tailored exterior. "You wanted to see me?" Victor Phyllis asked, her voice dripping with a dangerous, intoxicating thrill. "Make it quick. Running a multinational conglomerate takes up a surprising amount of my day." Victor set his glass down on the desk, the sharp clink echoing in the quiet room. "You have a lot of nerve walking into my home with that arrogant look on your face, Phyllis. You used the tragedy of Jack's kidnapping a man you claim to care for to line your own pockets and steal a company that does not belong to you." Phyllis laughed, a sharp, abrasive sound that grated against Victor's nerves. "Steal? I didn't steal anything. I stepped in when leadership was needed. I stabilized the stock. I secured the supply chains. You were too busy playing the Dark Knight trying to save Jack to notice that the business world doesn't stop spinning just because a Newman is distracted." "You outmaneuvered my people while my back was turned," Victor rumbled, his voice dropping an octave, carrying that familiar menacing edge. "You took advantage of a crisis. I expect an apology, and I expect your immediate resignation from the Chancellor Board. You got that." Phyllis stepped closer to the desk, slamming her hands flat against the polished oak, leaning in until she was inches from Victor's face. "I am not apologizing to you, Victor. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. I took you down. I beat you at your own game. You left a flank open and I drove a truck right through it. Chancellor Industries is mine to run, and if you think you can intimidate me into stepping down, you are losing your touch." Victor's jaw tightened. He did not blink. He saw her not just as a nuisance, but as a legitimate existential threat to the corporate ecosystem he had spent decades building. "You have made a grave mistake, Phyllis. You think you can sit in Catherine Chancellor's chair and play with the big boys? I will strip you of everything." Phyllis straightened up, smoothing her jacket with feigned nonchalance. "Bring it on, old man," she whispered, turning on her heel and marching out of the study, leaving the scent of her expensive perfume lingering in the air like a challenge. As soon as the doors closed, Victor picked up his phone, dialing his chief of security. The gloves were off. If Phyllis wanted a war, he would give her a massacre. "I want every skeleton Phyllis Summers has ever buried," Victor instructed, his tone cold and clinical. "Dig into her offshore accounts. Look at the shell companies she used during her hotel ventures. Find the hacking records, the forged documents, the blackmail schemes. I want classified information, sealed, records, everything. Find me the loophole that will destroy her credibility." Victor knew that raw aggression wouldn't be enough. Phyllis was slippery, accustomed to fighting dirty. He needed a silver bullet, a critical vulnerability to attack her power at its foundation. And he knew exactly where to apply the pressure. Jack Abbott was back, but he was not whole. The kidnapping had taken a severe physical and psychological toll. Jack was confined to the Abbott mansion, suffering from severe PTSD, tremors, and sleepless nights. He was frail, a shadow of the titan he once was. Victor, ruthless in his pragmatism, saw Jack's unstable health not as a tragedy to be respected, but as a lever to be pulled. Victor called an emergency off-the-books meeting with the key minority shareholders and board members of Chancellor Industries who had previously supported Jack's vision. They gathered in a dimly lit private room at the Genoa City Athletic Club. Victor stood at the head of the table, projecting absolute, unwavering authority. Gentlemen, Victor began, his eyes scanning the nervous faces of the executives. Let us look at the reality of the situation. Jack Abbott, the man who was supposed to anchor this company, is a broken man. He is traumatized, shattered by his ordeal. He cannot protect you. And who holds the reins in his absence? Phyllis Summers, a woman whose emotional volatility and history of criminal behavior are legendary. Without Jack to keep her in check, she is a loose cannon operating without a safety net. If you leave your investments in her hands, you will lose everything. Back my play to remove her, or Newman Enterprises will crush Chancellor in the market, and you will go down with the ship. The threat was implicit, heavy, and terrifyingly real. The board members exchanged anxious glances, the seeds of doubt firmly planted. Word of Victor's clandestine meetings reached Phyllis within hours. She stood in the sprawling glass-walled CEO office of Chancellor Industries, looking out over the sweeping view of the city skyline. The walls were closing in, but Phyllis refused to show an ounce of weakness. The paranoia was creeping in a familiar dark companion, but it only fueled her fire. She immediately launched a fierce, uncompromising counterattack. Phyllis summoned her executive team, her eyes blazing with manic, brilliant energy. She didn't just defend her position, she went on the offensive. Anyone in this building who speaks to Victor Newman is fired, Phyllis declared, pacing the length of the boardroom table. I don't care if you've been here for 20 years. Chancellor Industries is an independent fortress. We do not bow to Newman Enterprises. I am the architect of this company's future, and I am in absolute control. To prove her point, Phyllis ruthlessly severed contracts with 3 major Newman subsidiaries, eating the penalty fees just to send a message. She publicly asserted her dominance, holding a press conference where she painted herself as the savior of Chancellor, the iron-willed leader, guiding the ship through the storm of Jack's absence. She was a tigress defending her territory, projecting a facade of absolute strength that masked the exhausting reality of fighting a multi-front war. But Victor Newman was a master tactician, and when frontal assaults met resistance, he utilized his entire arsenal. He realized Phyllis was deeply entrenched, so he turned to his most potent, elegant weapon, his wife. Nikki Newman despised Phyllis Summers with a passion that had burned bright for decades. When Victor laid out his plan in the living room of the ranch, Nikki didn't hesitate. She poured herself a cup of black coffee, her blue eyes icy and resolute. She has gone too far this time, Victor. It's time someone reminded Phyllis of her place. Nikki weaponized her immense social capital, launching a sophisticated lethal whisper campaign to isolate Phyllis in the business and elite circles of Genoa City. Nikki held court in the dining room of the athletic club, sitting with the wives of banking CEOs, hospital board directors, and charity heads. It is just such a profound tragedy about poor Jack, Nikki would sigh, her tone dripping with faux sympathy. But Phyllis, well, you all know how erratic she gets under pressure. Victor is terribly concerned about the stability of Chancellor Industries. I hear the major banks are looking very closely at her credit lines. It would be a shame for anyone's reputation to be tarnished by associating with her impending collapse. The effects were immediate and devastating. Suddenly, Phyllis's phone calls were going to voicemail. Invitations to exclusive galas and charity events, crucial networking arenas for a CEO, were abruptly revoked. Banks began stalling on loan approvals, demanding exorbitant collateral. Vendors started demanding payment up front. Nikki's invisible velvet-gloved hand was choking the life out of Phyllis's corporate infrastructure, isolating her completely. Seeing the cracks forming in Phyllis's armor, Victoria Newman decided it was time to strike from within. Victoria, the cold, calculating heir to the Newman throne, knew that Phyllis's Achilles' heel had always been her children. Victoria picked up her phone and invited Summer Newman Phyllis's daughter to a private lunch at Society. The restaurant was filled with the soft clinking of silverware and low ambient jazz. Victoria ordered a sparkling water, her posture perfect while Summer nervously picked at her salad. Victoria leaned in, playing the role of the deeply concerned aunt and seasoned corporate executive. Summer, I asked you here because I'm worried, Victoria said softly, her eyes full of manufactured empathy. Your mother is under an immense amount of pressure. Running Chancellor is a monumental task, but she's obsessing over this feud with my father. She's using Jack's trauma as a shield to justify her own reckless behavior. You know her history, Summer. When she gets like this paranoid, isolated, defensive, she spirals. She's gonna crack, and she's gonna take Chancellor down with her. You need to step in. For her own good. Summer's heart ached. She loved her mother fiercely, but she was acutely aware of Phyllis's destructive patterns. The seeds of doubt Victoria planted took root instantly. Summer left Society and marched straight to the Chancellor offices, bypassing the assistant and throwing open the doors to the CEO suite. Mom, we need to talk, Summer demanded, her voice trembling with anxiety. You look exhausted. You're alienating everyone. Victoria thinks you're spiraling, and honestly, looking at you right now, I think she might be right. You need to step down before you destroy yourself." Phyllis froze the betrayal, hitting her like a physical blow. The internal tension that had been simmering finally boiled over. Victoria Phyllis exploded, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "You're listening to Victoria Newman. That Ice Queen is trying to manipulate you to get to me. How dare you walk into my office and echo Newman talking points? I am fighting for my life here, fighting for our future, and my own daughter is..." stabbing me in the back. The mother-daughter blowout was catastrophic, leaving Summer in tears and Phyllis more isolated and unhinged than ever. Victoria's machinations had worked perfectly, fracturing Phyllis's focus and weakening her internal resolve. Sensing the blood in the water, Victor moved in for the kill. The Genoa City Chamber of Commerce was hosting its annual gala at the Grand Phoenix, a highly publicized event attended by every major player in the state's business sector. Flashing cameras illuminated the red carpet, and the ballroom was packed with the elite. Victor took the podium to deliver the keynote address. He looked out over the crowd, locking eyes with Phyllis, who sat rigid at a front table. Victor didn't just hint at her incompetence. He dropped a tactical nuke. "Integrity is the bedrock of Genoa City's economy." Victor's voice boomed through the speakers, silencing the room. "And it is with a heavy heart that I must expose a rot at the center of one of our most storied institutions. Phyllis Summers is fundamentally incapable of leading Chancellor Industries." A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. Victor signaled his assistant, who immediately began distributing sealed folders to the press corps in the back of the room. "In those folders you will find irrefutable proof of Miss Summers' recent mismanagement." Victor continued, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "Evidence of hidden debts, reckless off-the-books investments, and a covered-up scandal from her past hotel ventures that leaves Chancellor critically vulnerable to federal audits. I, Victor Newman, stake my life's work, my personal prestige, and my legendary reputation on the absolute fact that this woman is a parasite. I will protect the Chancellor Empire from her disastrous reign, whatever the cost." The room erupted into chaos. Reporters shouted questions, camera flashes blinded the attendees, and Phyllis sat frozen, the walls of her meticulously constructed kingdom crumbling around her. Victor had publicly bet his own name to prove she was unfit, a move so bold and devastating that it left no room for retreat. Miles away from the flashing lights and corporate bloodshed, the Abbott mansion was cloaked in heavy, suffocating silence. The scent of old wood floor wax and generational wealth lingered in the air. Jack Abbott sat alone in a velvet armchair in his study. The fireplace burned low, casting a dim, flickering light across his pale, thinner face. The physical wounds from his kidnapping were healing, but the psychological scars ran deep. For weeks he had been lost in a fog of trauma, unable to focus, unable to fight, but tonight the fog was finally lifting. Jack held a tablet in his trembling hands, watching the live stream of the Chamber of Commerce gala. He watched Victor's ruthless, calculated takedown. He remembered the news clips of Phyllis's vicious, venomous press conferences. He thought back to Phyllis's recent visits to his bedside. She had held his hand, yes, but her eyes had been distant, her conversations dominated by board seat tallies and stock prices rather than his recovery. He thought of Victor's sudden, intense interest in his health. The rumors of his mental decline conveniently leaked to the press just as Victor made his move on the board. A cold, hard realization settled in Jack's chest, replacing the lingering fear of his captivity with a slow-burning, pure fury. They weren't fighting for him. They weren't fighting to protect his legacy. Victor and Phyllis were tearing each other apart, and they were using his name, his trauma, and his near-death experience as nothing more than ammunition in their endless, petty corporate blood feud. He was the excuse. He was the pawn. Jack slowly lowered the tablet, his blue eyes regaining that sharp, dangerous spark that had made him a titan of industry. The weakness in his limbs seemed to evaporate, replaced by a rigid, unyielding pride. He was not a victim. He was not a ghost to be invoked by usurpers and rivals. He was Jack Abbott. He looked toward the dark, empty hallway of his ancestral home, his jaw set in a line of absolute resolve. "They think I'm dead," Jack whispered to the empty room, his voice raspy but laced with a terrifying promise. "They think I'm weak. They're about to find out how wrong they are." The neon bleeding through the heavy drapes of the Bellagio suite painted Adam Newman's face in fractured slashes of crimson and blue. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the glittering venomous snake of the Las Vegas Strip, but his mind was miles away, buried in the darkest corners of his own history. He had come here with one objective: to protect his brother. Nick, with his unyielding moral compass and his desperate need to play the righteous hero, was entirely out of his depth. The resurrected ghost of Matt Clark had lured Nick to the desert, baiting him into a trap that Nick was too noble to see. But Adam saw it. Adam knew Matt Clark. More importantly, Adam knew the language of this city's underbelly. It was a language of violence, leverage, and shadows. It was the language of Spider. Adam turned away from the window and stared at his reflection in the mirrored closet door. He slowly unbuttoned his tailored dress shirt, discarding the trappings of the reformed Newman executive, the devoted father, the loving partner. He reached into his duffel bag and pulled out a faded black leather jacket. As he slipped it on, the weight of it felt like a second skin. He didn't want to become Spider again, but Nick's life was on the line. Matt Clark was a rat, and catching a rat required a snake. Adam checked the magazine of his matte black Glock, the metallic click echoing in the silent room like a gavel striking a sound block. He was going to find Matt Clark, and he was going to end this threat using the only methods men like Matt understood. The descent into the Vegas underground was seamless, like slipping into a cold, familiar bath. Bypassing Victor Newman's vast, legitimate security apparatus, Adam tapped into the illicit network he had cultivated during his amnesiac years. It didn't take long for the whispers to lead him to a subterranean, smoke-choked poker room off Fremont Street. The air smelled of stale whiskey desperation and cheap cigars. Adam moved through the shadows with lethal grace, finally cornering Matt Clark in a damp concrete corridor behind the kitchens. The confrontation was brutally brief. Adam's hand shot out his fingers, wrapping around Matt's throat with crushing force, slamming the man against the cinder block wall. "Where is the leverage you have on my brother, Matt?" Adam's voice was a low, terrifying rasp, stripped of all humanity. "Give it to me, or they'll be scraping what's left of you off the asphalt." But instead of begging, Matt Clark began to laugh. A wet, choking sound bubbled up from his throat, blood staining his teeth. He looked at Adam, not with fear, but with a twisted, pitying amusement. "You always were a blunt instrument." Spider Matt wheezed, his eyes wide and manic. "You think I'm the one pulling the strings. You think I have the resources to take on the Newman family by myself." Adam tightened his grip, his thumb pressing into Matt's windpipe. "Talk." "I'm just a runner," Matt gasped, his face turning a mottled purple. "A small, insignificant cog. They just used me to get the Newmans looking the wrong way. And you just kicked down the door to the slaughterhouse. By hacking into my accounts, by shaking down my contacts today, you didn't just find me. You triggered their alarms." Adam's blood ran cold. "Whose alarms?" "The syndicate," Matt whispered, a genuine tremor of terror, finally breaking through his bravado. "The people who actually own this city. The people who launder blood money through the casinos. You made a lot of noise today, Spider. You woke them up. And they don't care about me, but they are going to slaughter your brother." Before Adam could extract another word, the heavy metal door at the end of the corridor exploded inward. The deafening roar of automatic gunfire shattered the air. Adam dropped Matt and dove behind a stack of steel kegs as bullets chewed through the concrete where he had just been standing. He returned fire, the muzzle flash illuminating the faces of 3 heavily armed mercenaries. This wasn't Matt Clark's doing. This was a highly trained, heavily funded kill squad. Adam managed to shoot out the overhead lights, plunging the corridor into darkness, and escaped through a ventilation shaft, his heart pounding, a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Matt Clark was nothing, a decoy, and Adam, in his arrogant assumption that he could control the board by playing dirty, had just exposed his family to a massive international criminal network. His reckless intimidation tactics had painted a massive target squarely on the back of the golden boy of the Newman family. Across town, Nick Newman was walking out of the local precinct, frustrated by the bureaucratic red tape that was stalling his legitimate investigation into Matt Clark. He pulled his collar up against the chill of the desert night, heading toward his rental car in the dimly lit parking garage. He was exhausted, his mind spinning with strategies to protect his family without compromising his integrity. He never saw the black SUV idling on the top floor. As Nick unlocked his car door, the screech of tires echoed through the concrete cavern. The SUV tore down the ramp, its headlights blinding him. The tinted windows rolled down and the sleek black barrels of suppressed submachine guns emerged. Instinct honed by years of surviving his family's chaotic legacy took over. Nick dove behind the concrete pillar just as a hail of bullets shredded his rental car, blowing out the windows and turning the chassis into Swiss cheese. Nick scrambled across the oil-stained concrete, his breath tearing through his lungs. He drew his own weapon, firing blindly toward the vehicle to buy himself seconds. The SUV slammed on its brakes, and 4 men in tactical gear poured out, moving with terrifying, silent precision. Nick was pinned down, vastly outgunned, and completely bewildered. Matt Clark didn't have this kind of muscle. This was a coordinated assassination attempt. Nick managed to shoot a fire extinguisher, the resulting cloud of white foam providing just enough cover for him to sprint toward the stairwell. He threw himself down the concrete steps, bullets chipping the walls inches from his head, plunging into the neon-lit chaos of the Vegas streets to lose his pursuers. An hour later, the door to their designated safe house, a nondescript motel on the edge of the desert, kicked open. Nick stood in the doorway, bleeding from a graze wound on his shoulder, his clothes torn, his eyes blazing with a fury that could rival the sun. Adam was already there pacing the floor, his phone glued to his ear as he frantically tried to call in favors from Riza Thompson and his old underworld contacts. He hung up as Nick entered the silence in the room, heavy and suffocating. "Nick, I can explain," Adam began, taking a step forward. "Don't," Nick snarled, his voice trembling with a rage so profound it seemed to vibrate the very walls. He walked forward and shoved Adam hard in the chest. "Don't you say a damn word. I was almost executed in a parking garage 10 minutes ago by a paramilitary hit squad. And somehow I know exactly whose fault this is." "I was trying to protect you," Adam fired back, his own defensive anger flaring. "Matt Clark was a trap. He was a front for a massive money laundering syndicate. I went underground to find out what he was really planning." "You went underground because you wanted to," Nick roared, wiping a smear of blood from his forehead. "You couldn't stand doing it the right way. You couldn't stand letting the authorities handle it. You had to put on the black hat, Adam. You had to become Spider again because that's the only way you feel alive." "The authorities are bought and paid for by these people," Nick, Adam yelled, gesturing wildly. "Your Boy Scout routine was going to get you killed. I shook the trees to see what would fall out." "And you dropped a grand piano on my head." Nick stepped closer, his face inches from his brother's. The fragile, hard-won truce they had built over the last year in Genoa City shattered into a million irreparable pieces in that cramped motel room. "You don't protect people, Adam. You infect them. You touch everything with this darkness, and you drag everyone down into the mud with you. I didn't ask for your help. I asked for a brother. And you gave me a monster." Nick turned toward the door, wincing as his shoulder pulled. "Where are you going?" Adam demanded, panic edging into his voice. "They are actively hunting you. You step outside, you're a dead man." "I'd rather take my chances with the cartel than spend another second in a room with you," Nick spat, his eyes cold and dead. "Stay away from me, Adam. I mean it. You're done." The door slammed shut, leaving Adam standing alone in the suffocating silence. He had lost him. In his desperate attempt to save his brother, he had completely alienated him, severing the Brotherhood they had fought so hard to repair. But the nightmare was far from over. As Adam sank onto the edge of the cheap mattress, burying his face in his hands, the door handle rattled again. He reached for his gun, his instincts flaring, but the person who walked in made his blood run colder than any assassin could. Chelsea Lawson stood in the doorway. She had flown out from Genoa City, driven by a gnawing, intuitive dread that had kept her awake for 3 nights. She dropped her designer travel bag, her wide eyes taking in the scene, the blood on the floor from Nick's wound, the maps and surveillance photos scattered across the bed, and Adam. Adam, sitting in the shadows wearing the black leather jacket, a loaded Glock resting on his knee. His knuckles were bruised and split. But it wasn't the blood or the gun that made Chelsea's breath hitch in her throat. It was his eyes. They were flat, cold, and utterly devoid of the warmth she had come to rely on. She was looking at Spider. "Chelsea," Adam whispered, his voice cracking. "What are you doing here?" "I came because you stopped calling," she said, her voice trembling, tears instantly spilling over her lashes. "I came because I had this horrible feeling that the man I loved was disappearing. And I was right. You shouldn't be here. It's not safe." He stood up, trying to soften his posture, trying to hide the weapon, but it was too late. "We were doing laundry," Chelsea sobbed, wrapping her arms around her own torso as if trying to hold herself together. "We were making breakfast for Connor. We were normal. You promised me. You swore to me that this part of your life was dead." "I had to do it for Nick," Adam pleaded, taking a step toward her. "Matt Clark." "Don't use Nick as an excuse," she screamed, stepping back, shrinking away from him as if he were radioactive. "You love this. You love the chaos. You love the power. I am looking at the man who didn't know me, who didn't love me, who ran an illegal gambling ring and broke people's legs for a living. Where is my husband, Adam? Where is Connor's father?" Every word was a dagger to his chest. The fear in Chelsea's eyes was absolute. The dark past she had spent years trying to help him overcome had just swallowed him whole in a matter of days. "Chelsea, please," Adam begged, tears finally pricking his own eyes. "I made a mistake, a massive, stupid mistake. I kicked a hornet's nest, and now they are coming for Nick. I have to fix this." "You can't fix this," she whispered, her voice hollow, devoid of hope. "You can only destroy it more. I'm going back to Genoa City. I'm going back to our son, and I don't know if I want you to follow us." Before Adam could process the devastating weight of her words, his burner phone vibrated violently on the nightstand. He grabbed it. It was a text from an unknown number. Attached was a live video feed. It was Nick. He was trapped in the Neon Boneyard, the massive outdoor museum where the rusted colossal signs of old Las Vegas casinos went to die. The video showed Nick pinned behind the massive unlit skull of the old Treasure Island sign. Red laser sights danced across the rusted metal around him. The criminal network hadn't just found him, they had corralled him into a killbox. The message below the video read times, "You woke us up, Spider. Now watch your brother sleep." Asterisk. Adam dropped the phone. The divide between him and Nick, the heartbreak in Chelsea's eyes, none of it mattered right now. Only survival mattered. "I have to go," Adam said, his voice dropping an octave, slipping entirely into the cold, calculated cadence of the killer he once was. He racked the slide of his Glock and grabbed a spare magazine. "Adam, don't," Chelsea pleaded, though she knew she couldn't stop him. "I broke this," Adam said, not looking back at her. "I have to pay the toll." He vanished into the Vegas night, driving like a demon possessed toward the outskirts of the city. The neon boneyard was a labyrinth of twisted metal, shattered glass, and dead light bulbs. As Adam breached the perimeter fence, he could hear the echoing cracks of suppressed gunfire. The Syndicate had sent a small army to make an example of the Newman family. Adam moved through the towering, rusted signs of the Stardust and the Sahara, becoming a ghost among the ruins of Old Vegas. He didn't fight like a Newman, he fought like Spider. He was ruthless, silent, and terrifyingly efficient. He dropped from the scaffolding of a giant martini glass, neutralizing 2 mercenaries before they even knew he was there. He used the shadows, the jagged metal, and his own utter disregard for his own life as weapons. He found Nick pinned down near the center of the yard, bleeding heavily from a new wound in his thigh. Nick was out of ammunition, gripping a heavy iron pipe, preparing for a final suicidal stand. 3 heavily armed men advanced on Nick's position, their weapons raised. Adam didn't hesitate. He stepped out from the cover of a massive rusted silver slipper, exposing himself entirely to the firing line. "Hey," Adam roared, drawing their fire. The night erupted in deafening violence. Bullets tore through the air, sparking against the metal around Adam. He felt a white-hot, agonizing burn tear through his left side, but he planted his feet, his weapon barking in rapid, precise succession. The 3 mercenaries dropped to the dirt, neutralized. Silence slammed back down over the boneyard, broken only by the sound of sirens wailing in the far distance, too late as always. Adam pressed a hand to his bleeding side, stumbling forward until he reached his brother. Nick was pale, breathing hard, staring at Adam with a mixture of shock, anger, and begrudging gratitude. "You're an idiot," Nick rasped, dropping the iron pipe. "I know," Adam breathed, sinking to his knees beside his brother, the adrenaline beginning to fade, leaving only the searing pain and the crushing weight of his reality. Adam ripped off his own jacket and pressed it hard against the bleeding wound on Nick's leg. Nick winced, but didn't push him away. They sat there in the dirt, surrounded by the towering dead neon ghosts of Las Vegas. Adam had saved Nick's life. He had faced the unimaginable threat he had carelessly summoned, and he had beaten it back. But as he looked at his brother's hard, unforgiving profile and remembered the absolute terror in Chelsea's eyes, Adam Newman realized the true cost of his victory. He had rescued Nick from the Syndicate, but the damage to their Brotherhood was catastrophic, a chasm blown wide open by betrayal and violence. He had protected his family from the monsters in the dark, but in doing so, he had proven to them and to himself that the biggest monster of all still lived inside him. The physical wounds would heal, but the fracture in his soul and the lives of the people he loved might never be repaired.